It's great to be here. I can't wait to talk more about this campaign, which is really
Programming. My intention is to bring my experience as well.
I would have moments where I would just not be okay around people.
As a social worker, I have always wanted to impact people and help.
Some of our young people get trapped in that pipeline at 16.
Has a mental health disorder and or diagnosis, when he or she has an episode, like they're not even conscious.
Too, to see, okay, how are we taking care of these human bodies behind bars?
Let's invest in people and not prisons. Welcome back to the podcast, the Treatment Not Jail podcast. Today we have the distinguished honor of having Casey Dalaporto, an attorney with the Legal Aid Society. And I would now like to bring Casey on so that she can tell us a little bit about herself and a little bit about the work that she has done centered around treatment, not jail. Casey?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I can't wait to talk more about this campaign, which has really consumed my life for the past couple of years. My name is Casey Dalaporto. I am a public defender and a policy attorney. Currently, I work at New York County Defender Services. We're a public defender office that operates in Manhattan. I have been a public defender for 10 years. I actually just hit my 10-year anniversary yesterday, October 16th, 2012 is when I began. And I've represented thousands and thousands of clients in the boroughs of Manhattan, Bronx, and Brooklyn, and Staten Island, in New York. And in 2021, I began working at New York County Defender Services, no longer representing clients directly, but instead working on policy initiatives. And the very first initiative that I got assigned to and that I really took an interest in is the Treatment Not Jail campaign, the Treatment Not Jail Coalition. It started maybe a year before I arrived there, through Jeff Berman and Andrea Nieves and Senator Jessica Ramos. They all got together, Catherine Bajuk. Everyone came together and started brainstorming about really fundamentally what was broken about our criminal justice system. And this was at a time when bail reform was under attack and discovery reform was under attack, and all of these different criminal justice initiatives were being criticized. And they put their heads together and said, really, at the root of it all, the people who need treatment are not getting treatment, and we're defaulting to an incarceratory model, and it just doesn't work. And when I first heard about it, I was like, absolutely. This is, I feel like it just addresses all of the broken elements of our criminal justice system, and finally gets at the root cause, and finally starts to fix some unaddressed issues that have gone on in these individuals' lives for decades, and have gone unaddressed for decades, and have just been ignored. And so that's when I got involved. Months after starting, I met Mark Graham, who, like everyone who meets Mark Graham, is the most inspiring and magnetic person that you could possibly encounter on a coalition such as this. So Mark and I started teaming up. We started building out the coalition, bringing more people like Deborah on board. And yeah, that's where we are today. That was a very long-winded response. I hope that's what you asked.
No, that wasn't that long-winded, Casey, because I want to go back to something that you said earlier. Like you said that this fixes some of the broken systems and some of the failures. Like, talk to our listeners about that.
So what struck me when I first became a public defender was that by the time I entered the picture, it felt like it was already too late. And, the circumstances that had contributed to this person's arrest, the person that I was representing, the circumstances that had contributed to it existed long, long, long before I met this person, and had really evaded any kind of intervention prior. We're talking a failure of so many different institutions: the education system, number one, the housing system, the child welfare system, the healthcare system, especially, and the mental health care system, the hospital system. So many different systems had failed this person, and then they sort of got shunted to the criminal justice system. And it was like, here's your case, this is the file, do the best you can, but we all know the outcome here. Jail is the only option. And it really, I for years and years grinded away, really trying to find alternatives. But the criminal justice system really, at the time, and it's gotten a little bit better, but it still is just really not equipped to handle, people's true issues, the reasons that the core reasons that they have become entrenched in the criminal justice system, that they got arrested in the first place. Our default response is jail and other forms of punishment, probation, surveillance, parole, or maybe community service or something like that. None of those issues help address the issue, help address their underlying root causes. And almost all of the things I've just mentioned actually create and exacerbate issues. So mental health issues, even regular health issues. So I think that the system is desperate for a paradigm shift. Treatment, not jail, is the only campaign that I've heard of, at least in New York State, at least in the United States. We hear about these other models that have worked in other countries, but in the United States, I think treatment, not jail is the most ambitious, but it's also the most thoughtful and evidence-based and compassionate and effective.
So Casey, I'm listening, and again, I hear you constantly refer to it as the criminal justice system. Is it really a criminal justice system?
That is a great question. It is absolutely not. It's the criminal injustice system, or most people refer to it as a criminal justice system, but actually in our field, we try to refer to it as a criminal legal system or the criminal injustice system, because, I say this many times, but I've handled thousands of cases, and I really struggle to find one in which justice, my sense of justice, your sense of justice, sort of the common sense of justice, was served. When I tell people about the cases, and I tell them with the actual nuance and the details that were implicated, no one feels good about what happened. And I think the reason is because, like I said, we're never addressed. This system never actually addresses the underlying issues that are driving these arrests, that are driving these behaviors that lead to arrests. The only real tool that we have is jail, and that's just horrific, especially in New York City, especially in New York State. And so I don't think anyone ever when somebody's consigned to that kind of fate, sent to incarceration, I don't think anyone ever feels that that's just. It's just a tragedy.
So one more. Let me ask you another thing, Casey. Again, because I'm listening to you, and I just want, for clarity's sake, for our listeners, I heard you talk about how all of these different components and ingredients in society that are there to, quote unquote, if you will, help people. And it's almost as if these particular systems that we have in place designed to help people are actually the stepping stones or the steps to incarceration. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take, I named like the education system, and we could talk about the school to prison pipeline, the fact that there are police officers in every school in New York City, and yet not enough social workers. I mentioned the housing system and how, we have first of all, we have a complete housing crisis from top to bottom, in New York City, at least, and throughout the state. We're experiencing housing shortage. There's no affordable housing, even for people who have, who are middle class, earning a good salary. They can't find housing. And then you have government supported housing, which is currently in a state of complete dilapidation, such that the federal government keeps threatening to intervene because people are just forced to live in squalor. And so it feels like these systems that are under the auspices are supposed to be helping and bringing up our society and propping everyone up and supposed to be a safety net is really just a setup. And as you said, it's sort of exacerbating their underlying trauma or creating trauma that didn't necessarily exist previously. And so it's definitely not addressing any mental health concerns. If anything, it's actually exacerbating it. And then all of these individuals who can't cope, understandably can't cope with the circumstances that they're being forced into, are then sort of captured in this, police dragnet. We've like criminalized so much of behavior that's really actually a reflection of a person's desperation. We've criminalized things. Basically, we've criminalized homelessness. We've criminalized addictions. We've criminalized any kind of dysfunction that a person exhibits, because we don't know what to do with them except to throw them away, except to throw them in jail. And the reality is, and Mark and I talk about this a lot, like, that doesn't solve your problem. That doesn't solve anyone's problem. It creates a lot of problems, and it makes whatever underlying issues that the person was experiencing before way, way worse.
All right, Kay, so I want to ask you again, another legal, if you will, moral question, because like when we incarcerate someone that has a mental health diagnosis, and we know they have a mental health diagnosis, and oftentimes coupled with the mental health diagnosis, they also have a substance use, diagnosis or disorder. So we incarcerate them, let's say 4 or 5 years, and then we release them from prison. And how does that impact public safety?
Right. This is something that we talk about a lot. There's a really high rate of recidivism shortly after somebody is released from prison. And the reason for that, and this is not even, this is not a logical leap. I think anybody can sort of surmise why that might be. It's because the person is suddenly released with a bus fare. Ostensibly, they're supposed to be receiving some form of identification, but that's not even guaranteed. And there's been some reports that that doesn't even happen. And then they're on their own, and they have to reestablish their lives on their own. And when they're released from prison, they're also in all likelihood under, some sort of community supervision. So the first thing they have to do is, report to parole. I understand that, on paper, parole is meant to rehabilitate and That's not at all what I hear from the people that have actually been on parole, that it's like a completely consuming and really onerous and more sort of morale. It's sort of like.
So, Case, I want to go back to something
trying
you
to
said
say-
earlier too, when you were talking about the whole idea of housing, healthcare, mental health care. So when we released them from prison and they were homeless, and we released them right back to a homeless shelter, what have we done to the society? We released them back to a homeless shelter. Basically, that is a facsimile of prison. Have we made the public a safer place by doing that? Depriving them of the very things that they were deprived of, that was an ingredient for them to get incarcerated?
Right. And I think a lot of shelters too are just are sort of designed to keep people out. So even if you do land in a homeless shelter, and there's a very good reason why a lot of people try to avoid that. They don't want to go into a shelter because it's dangerous, because it's dirty, and because it's also sets them up for further arrests or further law enforcement encounters. Also our system really, like, they make it, the homeless shelter system in New York makes it really difficult to actually live in a shelter for a long period of time. They kick you out at a certain hour. You're not allowed to go back. You don't have permanent lockers. You don't have permanent rooms. These are many of the shelters. Obviously, there's some where you can actually find some more stability, but those are really difficult to access. You have to go on wait lists. You have to meet all of these other criteria. So the homeless, or the shelter system in New York is really in dire need of overhaul, and makes it really difficult for somebody to reestablish housing if they've lost it. And that's the reason why you see so many people just give up on it and sleep wherever they can, wherever's warm, in the subway or in lobbies, or anywhere that they can find a safe corner.
And would you say, Casey, that some of these people are individuals that have a mental health diagnosis and a substance use disorder? Would it be safe to assume that a large percentage of them belong to that population?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to say that, I think at this point, almost everyone, either themselves or a family member or a close friend, has gone to therapy, right? And we all know how difficult it is to even access a therapist, let alone somebody who, even if you have health insurance, even if you have all the resources in the world, you're well connected with family, you're well connected with friends who can support you. Finding a therapist, getting an appointment with a therapist, finding a way to pay for therapy, is inordinately difficult in the United States. It is so incredibly difficult that most people just give up before they even make it to the final stage, before they even make contact with the support that they need. Now imagine trying to do that while you're homeless. You don't have health insurance. You have no disposable income, so you have no way to pay for it, because most of it is not covered by insurance. And you don't have, a regular pharmacy where you can just go pick up your prescriptions. You don't have, and on top of that, maybe you have an even more serious diagnosis that would would make it harder for you to actually navigate these complex systems like the healthcare system. So it's almost as if we've completely abandoned mental health in the United States. We talk about it a lot, but nobody actually makes it seamless or frictionless to access it, even for the most privileged. And it is almost criminal the way that we treat people trying to access mental health who are less privileged and who don't have those kinds of community supports, financial resources, even just education or the language proficiency to be able to navigate these really complicated, arduous systems.
So, Casey, let me ask you this question. So, with this fear mongering that we're doing right now with our media system, we're actually victimizing the victim and blaming the victim for being a victim under the auspices of public safety. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I think that it's really easy to scapegoat the person who is experiencing a crisis and who's exhibiting some kind of dysfunctional behavior. And rather than trying to figure out what's going on and addressing the underlying issue, we just say, this person's bad. This person's bad, and we need to get rid of this person and other people like this person. And the reality is that there's as a society, we have failed that person. That's actually what's happening. When you hear these really sensational stories about people with underlying mental health issues, getting arrested for something, oftentimes the behavior itself reflects like the actual the mental health disorder. A normal person, good or bad, doesn't just walk down the street naked, for example. They don't just walk down the street holding their own feces in their hand. This is something that only people who are in the midst of a crisis would actually do. And yet, rather than asking ourselves how it got to this point and why nobody helped, and why nobody is reaching out and supporting this person, we blame this person who's exhibiting, who's in the middle of the crisis, who's incredibly vulnerable, who's obviously not well, who needs help, who's asking and begging in every possible way that they can for assistance. We blame them, and then we want to inflict as much pain as we can towards them. Like these media stories will basically call for the reinstatement of capital punishment in New York. And the way that we handle that as a culture is actually cruel. And I think that generations from now, we're going to look back on this and be horrified by the way that our media and in some instances our public-facing figures have scapegoated those with underlying mental health issues.
So basically what we're actually doing, Casey, which is one of the things that, like I've been really clear and crystal clear articulating, is that we are creating a public health crisis. And we're blaming the public health crisis not on the systems that are failing, but on the victims who are, as you just eloquently expressed it, reaching out on every level for help. And our response to that help is that we're going to incarcerate you for a while. We'll give you a timeout for 5 or 10 years, or 15, 20, 25 years. And then maybe, you'll come out after we've sat you down, not treated you, but after we've sat you down, maybe you'll come out differently than you went in.
Right.
But
Exactly.
as you just alluded to, they come out worse. So why is it, Casey? And I'm just, this is a rhetorical question. Why is it that we as a society are blaming the victim?
I think it's because it's the easiest way to score a win politically, honestly. I think it taps into people's fear, and in an election cycle, and in New York, we have a 2-year election cycle for our legislators. And in an election year, voters can be easily swayed by fear mongering. And so I fear that, and then on top of it, you have the media that gets lots of clicks. They get a lot of clicks for these sensational headlines and sensational op-eds. And it's a really shallow analysis of the actual situation in New York City and New York State. The uptick in crime alleged, whether it's as dramatic as some headlines will lead you to believe or not. It's a very complex issue, and every neutral bipartisan entity that's ever studied it will tell you that bail reform really cannot be tied to any of these changes or these trends, or any of the other criminal legal system reforms. They will also tell you that incarceration doesn't work. It makes things worse, and it leads to more crime ultimately. And yet it still dominates the media, and it dominates the airwaves, and it dominates a lot of the conversation in Albany and in City Hall. And I think that's because, like I said, I hate to be cynical, but I think that's because an easy way to sway voters is by tapping into their fears. And it's a knee-jerk reaction. You hear that there is rising crime and you say, lock them up. And, it only takes a little bit more reflection and thought to say, actually, that doesn't work. Let's try something that does work. But in our society, where people have a very short attention span and they don't want to think too deeply about really sort of depressing the depressing state of affairs that is our criminal legal system, I think voters are very easily swayed by simple solutions like more incarceration.
And historically, we know that incarceration does not deter crime. We know that incarceration does not treat mental health. We know that incarceration does not treat substance use disorders. These are things that we know. And as you just beautifully said, again, eloquently, we know that it doesn't work. But as a community and as a society, we continue to do that which does not work, has not worked, will not work.
Right.
And somehow, in the deep, darkest recesses of our minds, we believe that it is working. And the reality shows that it doesn't work. And especially when we talk about the idea and notion of public safety. See, if we want to make the community safe, we have to treat mental health diagnosis. We have to treat substance use disorder. And I would like to, I want to thank you, Casey, for coming in and sharing your 10 years of criminal legal system, criminal injustice system experience, so that hopefully enough people will be able to just see that this hasn't worked, it will not work, and it doesn't work, and get behind supporting treatment, not jail. If we want the public to be a safer place, we have to support and push this bill. Again, I want to thank you, Casey, for, taking out your time tonight and sharing your insights with us from a legal perspective and from an empirical research perspective. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be here. Call me anytime.
Thank you.